Well, hello. This is going back in time to the human all too human once again, picking back up with the final part of the history of the moral feeling. That one, it's been pretty crazy so far, and there's a lot of stuff that I don't necessarily believe in, but there's some pretty cool little bits. Anyway, this is gonna be parts 97 to 107, wrapping up this section. There's one more entire section in the book. 97. Delight in the moral. A potent species of joy, and thereby the source of morality, is custom. The customary is done more easily, better, therefore, preferably. A pleasure is felt in it, and experience thus shows that since this practice has held its own, it must be good. A manner or moral that lives and lets live is thus demonstrated advantageous, necessary, in contradiction to all new and not yet adopted practices. The custom is therefore the blending of the agreeable and the useful. Moreover, it does not require deliberation. As soon as man can exercise compulsion, he exercises it to enforce and establish his customs, for they are to him a tested life wisdom. So, too, a community of individuals constrains each one of their number to adopt the same moral or custom. The error herein is this: because a certain custom has been agreeable to the feelings, or at least because it proves a means of maintenance, this custom must be imperative, for it is regarded as the only thing that can possibly be consistent with well being. The well being of life seems to spring from it alone. This conception of the customary as a condition of existence is carried into the slightest detail of morality, inasmuch as insight into true causation is quite restricted in all inferior peoples. A superstitious anxiety is felt that everything be done in due routine, even when a custom is exceedingly burdensome. It is preserved because of its supposed vital utility. It is not known that the same degree of satisfaction can be experienced through some other custom, and even higher degrees of satisfaction, too. But it is fully appreciated that all customs do become more agreeable with the lapse of time, no matter how difficult they may have been found in the beginning, and that even the severest way of life may be rendered a matter of habit, and therefore a pleasure. 98. Pleasure in social instinct. Through his relation with other men, man derives a new species of delight in those pleasurable emotions which his own personality affords him, whereby the domain of pleasurable emotions is made infinitely more comprehensive. No doubt, He has inherited many of these feelings from the brutes, which palpably feel delight when they sport with one another. As mothers with their young, so too the sexual relations must be taken into account. They make every young woman interesting to every young man from the standpoint of pleasure, and conversely, the feeling of pleasure originating in human relationships makes men in general better. The delight in common, the pleasures enjoyed together heighten one another. The individual feels a sense of security. He becomes better natured. Distrust and malice dissolve. For the man feels the sense of benefit and observes the same feeling in others. Mutual manifestations of pleasure inspire mutual sympathy. The sentiment of homogeneity, the same effect is felt also at mutual suffering, in a common danger, in stormy weather. Upon such a foundation are built the earliest alliances, the object of which is the mutual protection and safety from threatening misfortunes, and the welfare of each individual. And thus the social instinct develops from pleasure. 99. The guiltless nature of so called bad acts. All bad acts are inspired by the impulse to self preservation, or, more accurately, by the desire for pleasure and for the avoidance of pain in the individual. Thus are they occasioned, but they are not, therefore, bad. Pain is self prepared, does not exist except in the brains of the philosophers, any more than pleasure self prepared. Sympathy in the Scolfener sense, in the condition anterior to the state we kill the creature, be it man or ape, that attempts to pluck the fruit of a tree. Before we pluck it ourselves, should we happen to be hungry at the time, and making for that tree, as we would do today. So far as the brute is concerned, if we were wandering in savage regions, the bad acts which most disturb us at present do so because of the erroneous supposition that the one who is guilty of them towards us has a free will in the matter, and that it was within his discretion not to have done these evil things. This belief in discretionary power inspires hate, thirst for vengeance, malice, the entire perversion of the mental processes, whereas we would feel in no way incensed against the brute, as we hold it irresponsible. To inflict pain not from the instinct of self preservation, but in requital, this is the consequence of false judgment, and is equally a guiltless course of conduct. The individual can, in that condition which is anterior to the state, act with fierceness and violence, for the intimidation of another creature in order to render his own power more secure. As a result of such acts of intimidation, thus acts the powerful, the superior, the original state founder, who subjugates the weaker. He has the right to do so, as the state nowadays assumes the same right. Or, to be more accurate, there is no right that can conflict with this. A foundation for all morality can first be laid only when a stronger individuality or a collective individuality, for example, society, the state, subjects the single personalities, hence builds upon their or unification and establishes a bond of union. Morality results from compulsion. It is, indeed, itself one long compulsion to which obedience is rendered in order that pain may be avoided. At first, it is but custom, later, free obedience, and finally, almost instinct. At last, it is like everything habitual and natural associated with pleasure is then called virtue. 100. Shame. Shame exists whenever a mystery exists. But this is a religious notion which, in the earlier period of human civilization, had great vogue. Everywhere there were circumscribed spots to which access was denied on account of some divine law, except in special circumstances. At first, these spots were quite extensive, inasmuch as stipulated areas could not be trod by the uninitiated, who, when near them, felt tremors and anxieties. This sentiment was frequently transferred to other relationships, for example, to sexual relations, which, as the privilege and gateway of mature age, must be withdrawn from the contemplation of youth for its own advantage. Relations which many divinities were busy in preserving and sanctifying, images of which divinities were duly placed in marital chambers as guardians. In Turkish, such an apartment is termed a harem or a holy thing. The same word also designating the vestibule of a mosque. So, too, kingship is regarded as a center from which power and brilliance stream forth, as a mystery to the subjects, impregnated with secrecy and shame, sentiments still quite operative among peoples who, in other respects, are without any shame at all. So, too, is the whole world of inward states, the so called soul, even now. For all non philosophical persons, a mystery, and during countless ages it was looked upon as a something of divine origin. in direct communication with deity. It is, therefore, an auditum and occasions shame. 101. Judge not. Care must be taken in the contemplation of earlier ages, that there be no falling into unjust scornfulness. The injustice in slavery, the cruelty in the subjugation of persons and peoples must not be estimated by our own standard, for in that period the instinct of justice was not so highly developed. Who dare reproach de Genoese Calvin for burning the physician Servetus at the stake? It was a proceeding growing out of his conviction. And the Inquisition, too, had its justification. The only thing is that the prevailing views were false and led to those proceedings which seemed so cruel to us, simply because such views have become foreign to us. Besides, what is the burning alive of one individual compared with eternal hell pains for everybody else? And yet, this idea then had hold of all the world without in the least vitiating with its frightfulness the other idea of a God. Even we, nowadays, are hard and merciless to political revolutionists. But that is because we are in the habit of believing the state a necessity, and hence the cruelty of the proceeding is not so much understood as in the other cases where the points of view are repudiated. The cruelty to animals shown by children and Italians is due to the same misunderstanding. The animal, owing to the ecstasies of the church, fascism, is placed too far below the level of mankind. Much too, that is frightful and inhuman in history, and which is almost incredible, is rendered less atrocious by the reflections that the one who commands and the one who executes are different persons. The former does not witness the performance, and hence it makes no strong impression on him. The latter obeys a superior, and hence feels no responsibility. Most princes and military chieftains appear through lack of true perception, cruel and hard, without really being so. Egoism is not bad because the idea of the neighbor, the word is of Christian origin and does not correspond to truth, is very weak in us, and we feel ourselves, in regard to him, as free from responsibility as if plants and stones were involved. That another is in suffering must be learned, and it can never be wholly learned. 102. Man always does right. We do not blame nature when she sends a thunderstorm and makes us wet. Why then do we term the man who inflicts injury immoral? Because in the latter case, we assume a voluntary ruling, free will, and in the former, necessity. But this distinction is a delusion. Moreover, even the intentional infliction of injury is not, in all circumstances, termed immoral. Thus, we kill a fly intentionally, without thinking very much about it, simply because its buzzing about is disagreeable. And we punish a criminal and inflict pain upon him in order to protect ourselves and society. In the first case, it is the individual who, for the sake of preserving himself, or in order to spare himself pain, does injury with design. In the second case, it is the state. All ethic deems intentional infliction of injury justified by necessity. That is, when it is a matter of self preservation. But these two points of view are sufficient to explain all bad acts done by man to men. It is desired to obtain pleasure or avoid pain. In any sense, it is a question, always, of self preservation. Socrates and Plato are right. Whatever man does, he always does right. That is, does what seems to him good, advantageous, according to the degree of advancement his intellect has attained, which is always the measure of his rationally or rational capacity. 103. The inoffensive in badness. Badness has not for its object the infliction of pain upon others, but simply our own satisfaction, as, for instance, in the case of thirst for vengeance or of nerve excitation, every act of teasing shows what pleasure is caused by the display of our power over others, and what feelings of delight are experienced in the sense of domination. Is there, then, anything immoral in feeling pleasure in the pain of others? Is malicious joy devilish, as Skolfiner says? In the realm of nature, we feel joy in breaking boughs, shattering rocks, fighting with wild beasts, simply to attest our strength thereby. Should not the knowledge that another suffers on our account here, in this case, make the same kind of act, which, by the way, arouses no qualms of conscience in us, immoral also? But if we had not this knowledge, there would be no pleasure in one's own superiority or power. For this pleasure is experienced only in the suffering of another, as in the case of teasing. All pleasure is, in itself, neither good nor bad. Whence comes the conviction that one should not cause pain in others in order to feel pleasure oneself? simply from the standpoint of utility, that is, in consideration of the consequences of ultimate pain, since the injured party or state will demand satisfaction and revenge. This consideration alone can have led to the determination to renounce such pleasure. Sympathy has the satisfaction of others in view, no more than, as already stated. Badness has the pain of others in view, for these are at least two, perhaps many more, elementary ingredients in personal gratification which enter largely into our self satisfaction, one of them being the pleasure of the emotion, of which species is sympathy with tragedy, and another when the impulse is to action, being the pleasure of exercising one's power. Should a sufferer be very dear to us, we divest ourselves of pain by the performance of acts of sympathy. With the exception of some few philosophers, men have placed sympathy very low in the rank of moral feelings, and rightly so. 104. Self defense. If self defense is generally held a valid justification, then nearly every manifestation of so called immoral egoism must be justified too. Pain is inflicted, robbery or killing done in order to maintain life, or to protect oneself and ward off harm. A man lies when cunning and delusion are valid means of self preservation. To injure intentionally when our safety and our existence are involved, or the continuance of our well being is conceded to be moral. The state itself injures from this motive when it hangs criminals. In unintentional injury, the immoral, of course, cannot be present, as accident alone is involved. But is there any sort of intentional injury in which our existence and the maintenance of our well being be not involved? Is there such a thing as injuring from absolute badness? For example, in the case of cruelty, if a man does not know what pain an act occasions, the act is not one of wickedness. Thus, the child is not bad to the animal, not evil. It disturbs and rends it as if it were one of its playthings. Does a man ever fully know how much pain an act may cause another? As far as our nervous system extends, we shield ourselves from pain. If it extended further, that is, to our fellow men, we would never cause anyone else any pain, except in such cases as we cause it to ourselves. When we cut ourselves surgically to heal our ills, or strive and trouble ourselves to gain health, we conclude from analogy that something pains somebody and can, in consequence, through recollection and the power of imagination, feel pain also. But what a difference there always is between the toothache and the pain, sympathy, that the spectacle of toothache occasions. Therefore, when injury is inflicted from so called badness, the degree of pain thereby experienced is always unknown to us. In so far, however, as pleasure is felt in the act, a sense of one's own power, of one's own excitation, the act is committed to maintain the well-being of the individual, and hence comes under the purview of self-defense, and lying for self-preservation. Without pleasure, there is no life. The struggle for pleasure is the struggle for life. Whether the individual shall carry on this struggle in such a way that he be called good, or in such a way that he be called bad, is something that the standard and the capacity of his own intellect must determine for him. 105. Justice that rewards. Whoever has fully understood the doctrine of absolute irresponsibility can no longer include the so-called rewarding and punishing justice in the idea of justice. If the latter be taken to mean that to each be given his due, for he who is punished does not deserve the punishment. He is used simply as a means to intimidate others from certain acts. Equally, he who is rewarded does not merit the reward. He could not act any differently than he did act. Hence, the reward has only the significance of an encouragement to him and others as a motive for subsequent acts. The praise is called out only to him who is running in the race, and not to him who is arrived at the goal. Something that comes to someone as his own is neither a punishment nor a reward. It is given to him from utilitarian considerations, without his having any claim to it in justice. Hence, one must say, the wise man praises not because a good act has been done, precisely as was once said. The wise man punishes not because a bad act has been done, but in order that a bad act may not be done. If punishment and reward ceased, there would cease with them the most powerful incentives to certain acts, and away from other acts. The purposes of men demand their continuance of punishment and reward. And inasmuch as punishment and reward, blame and praise, operate most potentially upon vanity, these same purposes of men imperatively require the continuance of vanity. 106. The waterfall. At the sight of a waterfall, we may opine that in the countless curves, spirations, and dashes of the waves, we behold freedom of the will and of the impulses. But everything is compulsory. Everything can be mathematically calculated. Thus it is, too, with human acts. We would be able to calculate in advance every single action if we were all knowing, as well as every advance in knowledge, every delusion, every bad deed. The acting individual himself is held fast in the illusion of volition. If, on a sudden, the entire movement of the world stopped short, and an all knowing and reasoning intelligence were there to take advantage of this pause, he could foretell the future of every being to the remotest ages, and indicate the path that would be taken in the world's further course. The deception of the acting individual as regards himself, the assumption of the freedom of the will, is a part of this computable mechanism. And finally, 107. Non responsibility and non guilt. The absolute irresponsibility of man for his acts and his nature is the bitterest drop in the cup of him who has knowledge. If he be accustomed to behold in responsibility and duty the patent of nobility of his human nature, all his estimates, preferences, dislikes, are thus made worthless and false. His deepest sentiment, with which he honored the sufferer, the hero, sprang from an error. He may no longer praise, no longer blame, for it is irrational to blame and praise nature and necessity. Just as he cherishes the beautiful work of art, but does not praise it, as it is incapable of doing anything for itself. Just as he stands in the presence of plants, he must stand in the presence of human conduct, his own included. He may admire strength, beauty, capacity therein, but he can discern no merit. The chemical process and the conflict of the elements, the ordeal of the invalid who strives for convalescence, are no more merits than the soul struggles and extremities in which one is torn this way and that by contending motives, until one finally decides in favor of the strongest, as the phrase has it, although, in fact, it is the strongest motive that decides for us. All these motives, however, whatever fine names we may give them, have grown from the same roots in which we believe the baneful poisons lurk. Between good and bad actions, there is no difference in kind, but at most, in degree. Good acts are sublimated evil. Bad acts are degraded, imbruted good. The very longing of the individual for self gratification, together with the fear of being deprived of it, obtains satisfaction in all circumstances. Let the individual act as he may, that is, as he must, but it in deeds of vanity, revenge, pleasure, utility, badness, cunning, be it in deeds of self sacrifice, sympathy, or knowledge. The degrees of rational capacity determine the direction in which this longing impels every society. Every individual has constantly present a comparative classification of benefits in accordance with which conduct is determined and others are judged. But this standard perpetually changes. Many acts are called bad that are only stupid because the degree of intelligence that decided for them was low. Indeed, in a certain sense, all acts are now stupid, for the highest degree of human intelligence that has yet been attained will, in time, most certainly be surpassed, and then, in retrospection, all our present conduct and opinion will appear as narrow and petty as we now deem the conduct and opinion of savage peoples and ages. To perceive all these things may occasion profound pain, but there is nevertheless a consolation. Such pains are birth pains. The butterfly insists upon breaking through the cocoon. He presses through it, tears it to pieces, only to be blinded and confused by the strange light, by the same realm of liberty, by such men as are capable of this sadness. How few there are! Will the first attempt be made to see if humanity may convert itself from a thing of morality to a thing of wisdom? The sun of a new gospel sheds its first ray upon the loftiest height in the souls of those few. But the clouds are massed there, too, thicker than ever, and not far apart from the brightest sunlight and the deepest gloom. Everything is necessity. So says the new knowledge. And this knowledge is itself necessity. All is guiltlessness, and knowledge is the way to insight into this guiltlessness. If pleasure, egoism, vanity be necessary to attest the moral phenomena and their richest blooms, the instinct for truth and accuracy of knowledge, if delusions and confusion of the imagination were the only means whereby mankind could gradually lift itself up to this degree of self enlightenment and self emancipation, who would venture to disparage the means? Who would have the right to feel sad if made aware of the goal to which those paths lead? everything in the domain of ethic is involved. Changeable, tottering. All things flow, it is true, but all things are also in the stream to their goal. Though within us the hereditary habit of erroneous judgment, love, hate, may be ever dominant, yet, under the influence of awakening knowledge, it will ever become weaker. A new habit, that of understanding, not loving, not hating, looking from above, grows up within us gradually and in the same soil, and may, perhaps, in thousands of years, be powerful enough to endow mankind with capacity to develop the wise, guiltless man, conscious of guiltlessness, as unfailing as it now develops the unwise, irrational, guilt conscious man. That is to say, the necessary higher step, not the opposite of it. All right. Thank you all so much for watching that. That was the final part of the history of moral feeling. It was written by Friedrich Nietzsche. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I'll see you next time.